That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so we are going to go through, we're going to look at some of these players that have fallen the most in fantasy football so far through the first 5 weeks. Now, we're going to not necessarily say that all of these players are buy low candidates. I mean, obviously, there's a good reason that these guys are worth 10% of what they were in fantasy drafts currently. And a lot of people are asking if you should just go through and cut them on your roster. But yeah, let's go player by player. Let's look at these players that have lost a considerable amount of value, identify the buy low targets, identify the players that we need to be selling for anything we can get. But before we get into it, you know exactly what we have to do. We have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats for anybody subscribed to the channel who dropped a like on the last video and left a comment at the same time. Let me go through and pick up 2 random comments. Our first one coming out from Fortnite Tryhard. Looks like a child here saying, "Wake up, looking forward to your videos. Need a flock hat to represent." Okay. Well, don't know if you're a child or not, but give me your address, give me your parents' address, whatever the hell you have. That way I can get you that flock hat sent out ASAP. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Now, our next one going to be coming out from J Fang. He says a flock hat would be great. Hook 'em horns. Hook 'em horns. You know exactly how to get a flock hat there. Thank you so much, my friend. Be happy to send you that out. Just make sure you give me your address ASAP. And yeah, let's go through and let's start it off with Allen Robinson, the #1 player that I think that this is easily our worst call of the season. Now, you know that I was of the opinion coming into the year, just to show how stupid I am, that I thought Allen Robinson was a safer option in drafts than Terry McLaurin. I was looking at it saying, well, Justin Fields probably going to be better than Ryan Fitzmagic. And at the same time, I mean, Allen Robinson really doesn't have that much target competition. Whereas with Terry McLaurin, you're going to have Curtis Samuel, you're going to have Logan Thomas, you're going to have Damien Brown. Well, now it looks like all 3 of those players in Washington are hurt. Looks like Justin Fields, one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. And this has led to Allen Robinson just with atrocious performance week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5. I mean, Allen Robinson has not had one solid week of fantasy football production so far this season. Right now, he is the wide receiver 70 in a points per game basis, where you're looking at him. He had 9 points week 1, 10 points week 2, and that week 2 performance as well. That was pretty much just all driven through the 1 receiving touchdown that he had. I mean, he had 2 receptions, 24 receiving yards. Not a good day. Week 3, he had 2 receptions, 27 receiving yards. Week 4, 3 receptions, 63. Week 5, 4 receptions, 32 receiving yards. Now, in looking at Allen Robinson, he did not practice yesterday, so this is a player that could possibly be missing week 6. That may be in question on if he will even play. Beyond this, to see Allen Robinson in this offense to improve through the rest of the season, I don't necessarily know how it's going to happen, because the problem is this offense is severely capped with the play that you've had from Justin Fields so far. If I'm going to be pulling up Justin Fields so far through his rookie season, you are going to see that this is a player that with the adjusted yards per attempt, he is currently sitting at quarterback 30. He is currently behind Jacoby Brissett. He is behind Davis Mills. He is behind Mac Jones, Ben Roethlisberger, Jared Goff. I mean, Taylor Heineke crushing him. Right now, he's at 5.4 adjusted yards per pass attempt, where he has had so far this season. I know that he hasn't started every single game. Trust me. I mean, you don't necessarily have to come out here and tell me this. He's had 458 passing yards. That doesn't seem like it can possibly be correct. Like, I'm going to have to go through and I'm going to have to double check this, just because for a quarterback to be having no passing volume at all, for a quarterback to be that disappointing. Right now, he's the quarterback 34 in fantasy points. He literally has less fantasy points so far than Tyrod Taylor this season. I mean, it's unbelievable. Where if you're looking at Justin Fields, he took over as the starter in week 3 against the Cleveland Browns, where he had 68 passing yards. Week 4, he had 209. This past week, he had 111. I mean, this is someone that's completing on average about 9 completions a game that he's starting. 9 to 10 completions. That is laughably bad. I think that it will get slightly better, but even if Justin Fields can kind of turn this ship around, Justin Fields can become a 50% better quarterback than he currently is, what are we then going to get? We're going to get 15 completions a game. We're going to get, instead of on average like 120 passing yards, we're going to get 160 passing yards. Like, he has to dramatically improve just for this offense to be below average. I think with that being said, Allen Robinson, someone that's on your bench every single week going forward. If you could use him in a trade package to upgrade somewhere else, we would. But in reality, that's probably not going to be the case, just knowing that with Allen Robinson here, this is a wide receiver that nobody wants. He's the wide receiver 70 for a reason. I think what you're probably going to have to end up doing is you're probably going to end up just having to roster him on your bench over the next few weeks. And then if we get one solid performance, if we get 1 week where Allen Robinson sees a spike, then we can go through, then we can look to sell high based on the name value, because I loved Robinson coming into the season. But if Justin Fields is going to be this damn bad, I think there's really no hope for Allen Robinson this year. Now, our next wide receiver will be Brandon Aiyuk. Now, here with Brandon Aiyuk, I actually had him ranked above Deebo Samuel coming into the season. I thought that Brandon Aiyuk was a better option over Deebo, and clearly we were wrong. We are laughably wrong. Or if you're going to be looking at Brandon Aiyuk, I wanted to give him the excuse. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt at the beginning of the season that he was dealing with that hamstring injury. That's why he wasn't 100%. That's why he wasn't producing. But so far, if you're looking at points per game, he has less points per game than Chris Conley, Paris Campbell, Devin Duvernay, Preston Williams, Keelan Cole, Adam Humphries, Tavon Austin, Rashad Higgins, Byron Pringle, MVS, Braxton Berrios, Anthony Miller, Deshaun Jackson. I mean, this is the range of wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk is in. I mean, this is laughable. Where if you're looking at his performances so far this season, he's only had one redeeming game in week 3, where he did have a receiving touchdown and 6 targets to go along with that. Even this past week against the Cardinals. Now, keep in mind, you had Trey Lance here. Looks like Trey Lance will be a great fantasy option on his own right when he is starting in San Francisco, but it looks like he's not going to be fantastic for the receivers here, just knowing that Trey Lance himself will be someone driving the majority of his fantasy production with his rushing capability, not necessarily what he provides with his passing volume. So I think if we're looking at Brandon Aiyuk, this is most likely another player that is in a very similar boat to Allen Robinson. He is someone that I think we have to hold for the time being. We have to look for an opportunity to sell in future weeks. Now, I think there is a path for Brandon Aiyuk almost turning this ship around over the next 2 to 3 weeks and actually being able to be a wide receiver that you sell high on. Because if you're looking at George Kittle being on the short-term IR right now, it's going to open up a significant amount of volume in this offense for a wide receiver like Brandon Aiyuk, who of course is still the clear wide receiver 2 behind Deebo Samuel. But if we get Jimmy Garoppolo to be the starting quarterback coming out of the bye week for the Indianapolis Colts in week 7, there I think that would be a fantastic spot for Brandon Aiyuk. We're not putting him in our starting lineup, of course, but at least show some life in this offense, knowing that the passing volume will be there with Jimmy Garoppolo, as he is not going to be rushing the ball himself. And to go along with this, if the passing volume's there with no George Kittle, you'd imagine that some of that has to go to Brandon Aiyuk. So Aiyuk, I think that this is a player that we can actually look to sell high, possibly after week 7, week 8, if we have Jimmy Garoppolo in here. But in the long term, it looks like Trey Lance, while I love Trey Lance from a fantasy football standpoint, still love him. The majority of that reason is based on the idea that he is an elite rushing quarterback. So the passing volume doesn't have to be there for Trey Lance to still be a very productive quarterback in fantasy football. But his receivers, on the other hand, I probably don't want much of. So I think for Brandon Aiyuk, especially when Trey Lance is in here at the second half of the season, and George Kittle is as well, he will be a sell high wide receiver as soon as he gets one solid week. Now, our next wide receiver is possibly the best buy in fantasy football right now. I mean, I hate to say this. We have just talked about this in depth for I don't know how long now. But A.J. Brown, right now the wide receiver 80 in points per game this season. You're looking at A.J. Brown, and you really have to put into context what we've actually had with this production so far. So back in week 1, this is a wide receiver that had 8 targets. To go along with those 8 targets, he had 4 receptions, 49 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. So not that great of a day for A.J. Brown. I mean, almost a standard A.J. Brown performance where he has about 15 fantasy points. The following week, he has 9 targets. That is 100% something I want to continue to monitor, because you get the Julio Jones, Derrick Henry breakout game against the Seattle Seahawks. But A.J. Brown was actually the number 1 wide receiver in this offense with the opportunity that he had. So definitely want to just put that as a positive box checked for A.J. Brown here. Then in week 3 against the Indianapolis Colts, he suffers a hamstring injury, so his 0.3 fantasy points literally means nothing. He didn't play the majority of that game, so I think we can throw that out the window. Misses week 4. Week 5, I thought he was going to be a great play with no Julio Jones against the Jacksonville Jaguars, a soft matchup. But the problem is, I mean, while yes, he did see 27% of his team's targets, which is an elite mark. If you could guarantee yourself for that with any wide receiver going forward, you would 100% lock that in. But the problem is, I mean, the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence, Urban Meyer, they could not put up points at all against a very soft Tennessee Titans defense. So this Titans offense just fueled everything through Derrick Henry, which should happen more times than not. But that's mainly based on the idea that, I mean, they were up the majority of the game by multiple touchdowns. They weren't having to throw the ball. So even though he sees 27% of his team's targets, he actually only had 6 targets in that contest. So with A.J. Brown, I know the majority of people have already heard me say this in the live streams. I know that he has fallen a considerable amount in value right now. I'm buying low. I mean, this is the first player on this list that I think is a fantastic trade target, and that you're looking every week that he has been healthy. He has led his team in targets. Going back to what we had as a rookie and a second-year player for A.J. Brown in Tennessee, this is one of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL. Please, someone go through. Give me another example, but besides Juju Smith-Schuster, besides Juju, of a wide receiver that was incredibly efficient in their first and second seasons, and then by the time they get to year 3, they actually get a bump up in volume, yet they bust in fantasy. That's literally impossible. That never happens. A.J. Brown here, I think, is a very safe option to buy low. I mean, he is still a high-end wide receiver 2 for us, no question. Now, our next wide receiver is going to actually be a pair of teammates here. We're going to go with Laviska Shenault and Marvin Jones. Okay, so with Laviska, this is a receiver, and Marvin Jones, I actually thought they were going to be both more appealing whenever you had DJ Chark going down in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense, saying, okay, well, there are more targets to be had, even if this is a bad offense overall. Also, I thought that Trevor Lawrence was going to be able to overcome horrible coaching by Urban Meyer, where he was going to be able to put up a decent season. But we were laughing at Justin Fields with his 5.4 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Trevor Lawrence is at 5.2. I mean, I would have never guessed this in a million years with how bad Trevor Lawrence has been so far this season. Now, we can sit here, we can make a million excuses for Trevor Lawrence. We can say it's Urban Meyer, we can say it's the offensive line, we can say it's X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter. The fact is we have some of the worst quarterback play in Jacksonville in the entire NFL at this moment. To go along with this, with Laviska Shenault and Marvin Jones, I mean, they were both very disappointing this past week. I mean, they each combined for 2 receptions, and that is it. Now, I will say between these 2 wide receivers, Laviska Shenault would be the one player that I would actually be willing to bet on a little bit more than Marvin Jones, because I think you could see Laviska trending in the positive direction the rest of the season. Whereas Marvin Jones, I think this is a wide receiver that's 31 years old. I mean, you see the significant drop-off over the past 2 weeks. Maybe that's a sign that, I don't want to say the end is near for Marvin Jones, but the odds that he becomes an every week player for you is probably pretty slim. Definitely still someone you want to have in the bye weeks for plus matchups. Nobody's going to be surprised if Marvin Jones comes out, crushes the Miami Dolphins in week 6. He did have 6 targets this past week. So Laviska and Marvin, and neither player I'm looking to buy low on, neither player I'm looking to cut off our roster. So that really only leaves us one option, and that's just going to be to make them permanent bench level players until we see otherwise. Now, our last wide receiver on this list before we get to some running backs will be another player we're looking to buy low on. Keep in mind, he's going to have a much higher price tag than the other players in this list because he's a much better wide receiver, Calvin Ridley. Now, with Calvin Ridley, this is not going to be the time to buy low. You notice that I did not put him on our buy low wide receiver video this week because we're just going to wait until next week because he's a buy this week. There's no reason to ever buy a player going into their bye week. And here, if you're looking at Calvin Ridley, he's played 4 weeks so far this season. Currently, he's a wide receiver 3 on a points per game basis. But if you're looking at the 4 weeks that he has played, I understand that, I mean, the efficiency hasn't been fantastic. This entire offense in Atlanta has been very disappointing. But if you're looking at Calvin Ridley himself, this is someone that's had a ridiculous amount of volume in this offense, where week 1, he gets 8 targets. Week 2, he gets 10. Week 3, he gets 11. Week 4, he gets 13 targets in this offense. So far, he's averaging about 10.5 targets a game this season. I think that clearly the volume's going to be there throughout the entire year. I mean, he's 26 years old. There's no reason to expect that a wide receiver drafted in 2018 all of a sudden is going to get considerably worse. So Calvin Ridley, I hate to say this, I mean, from what we have seen so far in a small sample, we've seen 4 weeks where Calvin Ridley has been good to go and he's played the entire game. I mean, I have not moved him down our rest of season rankings at all. I am literally viewing Calvin Ridley in the same exact light that we had him coming into this season. He is still a mid-wide receiver 1 for me, despite so far scoring as a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. You would expect, based on his historical rates in his yards per target, as well as his touchdown rate on his per target basis, I think that this will be a wide receiver that will get a considerable bounce back in the second half of the season. I mean, he will be past his bye week in week 6 as well. So it's going to be a perfect spot and a perfect opportunity to go through and trade for Calvin Ridley on the low. So definitely want to be trying to send out some offers for Ridley. I think he's probably the best buy low candidate in fantasy football. Next week, no reason to trade him right before we actually have the players that we would send away go through and play in their respective games. Now our next player is going to be Damien Harris at the running back position. Okay, with Damien Harris as a running back that I hated in fantasy drafts. He was everybody's favorite sleeper running back, even though it was hilarious because every single person was calling him their favorite sleeper running back because he really is a sleeper at that point. And if you're looking at Damien Harris, I mean, we have to be panicking because literally the same exact reason we hated him coming into drafts this year is the reason that he is failing in New England. And it's because he is a touchdown dependent player, and that's all he has. Because you're looking so far with Damien Harris, who's played 5 weeks. Keep in mind, he was in and out this past week against the Houston Texans. It was a very plus matchup. But here, Damien Harris, through 5 weeks, has had a combined 7 receptions out of this backfield. He has had a combined 8 targets at the same time. In a PPR format, like, it doesn't matter if Damien Harris comes out here, and it doesn't matter if he crushes with his rushing yards, very similar to what we've been talking about with Nick Chubb in Cleveland, why we wanted to avoid him in the first round. I mean, Damien Harris, yeah, you can put on the TV, you can show some highlight plays of him trucking some defenders, and you can be like, oh my God, Damien Harris is fantastic. And yes, this offensive line for the New England Patriots will get better throughout the season as well. But the problem is with Damien Harris, like when you see him come out, he has 100 rushing yards in week 1. With those 100 rushing yards, if he's only adding 2 receptions and 17 fantasy points at the same time, this is someone that's still finishing as a low-end running back too with 100 rushing yards. Literally, he has to have the rushing touchdown. If the rushing touchdown is not there, then, I mean, the floor is just at an all-time low for Damien Harris. And you're also looking at the fact that this past week against the Texans, I mean, he does finally get that rushing touchdown. He gets that rushing touchdown, and at the end of the day, he scores less than 12 fantasy points. And now he's lost 2 fumbles so far this season. I would imagine that if he loses 1 more, I mean, Bill Belichick is not going to be a massive fan of Damien Harris. Ramondre Stevenson, a running back that has a very similar amount of team investment, was actually active this past week, which is extremely encouraging for anybody wanting to pick up Ramondre Stevenson for the end of the season, like we've been talking about for a while now. So yeah, Damien Harris, I'm probably looking to sell Damien Harris before it's too late. I mean, he has a really strong matchup in week 7 against the Jets. I mean, in the Jets in week 2, he actually had 13.4 fantasy points, his highest mark of the season, where he had 62 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown at the same time. Maybe you look to sell him after week 7, but regardless, a player I do not want to be betting on in a PPR format. Now, our next running back, we'll call this the last player we're going to talk about. Of course, please go to the comment section. Let me know if you think we missed out on anybody here. Let's talk about Miles Sanders, another player that I have on a considerable amount of my own rosters. But after the Dallas Cowboys performance in week 3, we kind of identified Miles Sanders as a player that we needed to buy low, just knowing that his value was going to continue to fall more and more and more as the season progressed. And I know a lot of people are going to want to say, well, Mason, did you not see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game? Did you not see what he did in the fourth quarter? Did you not see how effective he looked? In that Bucs game, in the fourth quarter, the Philadelphia Eagles were down multiple touchdowns. With them being down multiple touchdowns, I mean, that's a spot where, of course, he's going to look decent running the football, because if they're going to be running the football, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers want to encourage them to do that, because they're just playing defense to not give up the long ball. They're playing defense to make sure that you don't have Quez Watkins or Devontae Smith getting behind the safeties, because they'll allow Miles Sanders to rip off 7-8 yard rushes at a time if that's going to continue to drain the clock, knowing the Buccaneers will also get the ball back. So yeah, I don't want to be just looking at how impressive he looked a week ago and saying that, oh my gosh, well, he was great on Thursday night. No, it doesn't really matter that much. What does matter, however, is with Miles Sanders here, this is an offense that Jalen Hurts is vulturing the rushing touchdowns at the goal line. This is an offense that at the same time, Kenneth Gainwell is getting some usage in the receiving game. I will say maybe trading away Zach Ertz will be a positive for Miles Sanders, and that was Zach Ertz. He doesn't really contribute much in the run blocking efficiency, and he does take targets away in the passing game at the same time. Now with Sanders, I think we could look to hold, because if you're looking at the matchups upcoming, he has the Raiders, he has the Lions. Maybe we look to sell after that point. We also need to see that Kenneth Gainwell isn't just taking a step up with his own role in this offense. Kenneth Gainwell this past week really didn't have that many touches on Thursday night, which was encouraging. Miles Sanders, in my opinion, is definitely the better running back out of the group. But there are reasons to be concerned with Sanders. I think we probably hold over the next 2 weeks, hoping that we get some of his value bouncing back just slightly, and then we can look to sell after that. Now, thank you. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Please go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment letting me know what you are doing with some of these falling players. And when you leave that comment, subscribe to the channel, drop that like, of course, you get entered in to win a Fantasy Flock Network hat. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Really hope y'all have a great day, and I really hope I see y'all with the live stream tonight.